Path of Exile's Secrets of the Atlas expansion is about 2 weeks out from launch, with the reveal livestream exactly 1 week away on June 5th. Now, we've been getting some quality of life teasers for the release, including the pause function being added and some really nice Horizon Orb changes. But the biggest news for Path of Exile 1 came last night during a developer interview conducted by Talkative Try with Path of Exile 2 game director Jonathan Rogers. Whilst this interview was primarily about Path of Exile 2's Dawn of the Hunt update and its future, we received an important piece of information right at the beginning about some internal changes at Grinding Gear Games in regards to both PoE 1 and PoE 2. Check it out.
In the distant past, we always had, the deadline is locked, the features are not, right? But then, as we sort of had PoE 2 in development, we started to get to a point where we were locking features instead, and I think, honestly, that kind of wasn't the best. So now, and I think this is going to be much healthier for PoE 1 as well, we're locking dates, we know when things are going to be, if something doesn't get done, we just won't put it in, we'll put it in the next one, So I think that's a much better way of doing development. So what that means is, we've got the PoE 1 release coming up, that's in June, and then, we'll have the PoE 2 release 2 months after that, so 4 months from one to the other, but then we know we're locking in already, there'll be another PoE 1 release 4 months after the PoE 1 release that we have, right, that'll be locked in, and then we'll have another PoE 2 release 4 months after that in December, right, so we're basically saying we're doing 4 months, it's going to be consistent, it's going to always be the case, we don't want to have this kind of uncertainty around this anymore.
So, Jonathan is laying out their plans for a 4-month release cycle for both PoE 1 and PoE 2, which would mean that there's going to be a GGG release every 2 months. That would be wild, but it's a lot closer to what they had originally planned back at ExileCon 2023. Now, the interesting thing about this, and how Jonathan discusses their philosophy for releases, and how they're planning to go back to meeting release deadlines in terms of dates rather than content scope, is that this pretty much explains the more recent unreliable release schedule of both games, with Path of Exile 1 receiving no proper updates in almost a year, because Path of Exile 2 has had major feature creep and everyone at GGG has been working on that game. From the initial planned launch window being missed by several years, that one could be explained by the issues caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. But more recently, PoE 2 was delayed from a June release to November, only to be delayed again until December, and it's likely that these delays were caused, at least partially, by the content scope of the release ballooning to an unrealistic level. And because they were working on getting specific content into a release rather than meeting a deadline, the release date had to be pushed back. Now, we know that in the past, GGG have always worked around dates rather than content, and this has been a massive part of their success, because players have always known that they can rely on the studio to put out another update in 3 or 4 months. Even if a patch is not to your liking, you can come back in a few months and try out the new patch. Co-founder of Grinding Gear Games, Chris Wilson, credited Kripparrian with the idea for this consistent release cycle during a talk at GDC in 2019, which, by the way, is a great talk. I fully recommend listening to that. But we know that GGG have stuck to this consistent release cycle in the past. Take, for example, Sanctum League, patch 3.20. This was an incredibly well-received league. But interestingly, the league didn't release with any of the unique endgame relics that drastically changed a Sanctum run and provide powerful rewards, including the no-hit run relic and Original Sin. And it also didn't release with Lycia's Invocations, which were currency items that could be used to add a keystone to a relic. Those were all added a week or two into the league, because GGG were working on a strict deadline to get the patch out on time, and those parts weren't ready for the initial release. More recently, we had the Trial of the Ancestors League, another very well received release. But again, the original update didn't include any of the Journey tattoos, and it didn't include the Keystone tattoo, which ended up being a player favourite in that league because of how incredible it was for buildcraft. Once again, those things were added a few weeks into the league, because they weren't ready for the initial release. Now, this is promising to hear Jonathan outline their plans to return to release date deadlines for both games, and it looks like, at least for now, this is going to be a 4-month cycle, which is the release cadence they had been on for PoE 1 since Sentinel League. That was patch 3.18. And I think it's fair to say that for most people, this will be a wait-and-see type of deal, as confidence in GGG has fallen a bit in recent times. But I do believe that they can pull this off, and I hope that they do. However, I do want to mention a concern I have in regards to something else Jonathan said during his interview with Talkative Try. When asked about mid-league game balance updates for Path of Exile 2, Jonathan had this to say.
The bandwidth for people who can do that kind of balance, like we really would need more of them in order to do character balance changes in the middle of the league. So effectively, the people who work on character balance are now working on PoE 1, right? There aren't many of them. There's really, I would say, 2 people who completely sight unseen can just make balance changes. There's a few more than that who can do it with like, a lot of checking and so on. And it's like, if those people are working on PoE 1, then we can't do like those kinds of easy things on PoE 2. So what that'll mean is as soon as PoE 1 comes out, the expansion, immediately we're going to start doing patches for PoE 2, like even mid-league for some of that balance stuff.
Now, it's a bit concerning to me that there are only 2 devs that are able to ship balance changes. And both of them, one of them likely being Mark, are seemingly going to be constantly shifting their focus from PoE 1 to PoE 2 and back again between releases. Balance is one of the most important changes in any given update. It's like artificial content. A major balance update can make a game feel fresh even in the absence of real content additions. For a long time in PoE 1, we had meaningful balance updates every single league. It was consistently one of the most exciting parts of a league for me personally. I loved the pre-league build theory craft in a time where nobody really knew what was going to be the best build or skill to play. And then, around the time of the last Atlas expansion in patch 3.17, the balance changes just kind of halted. We had several leagues with just a handful of lines in the balance section of the patch notes. And this meant that going into a league, the game already felt solved, even if there was new content being added. And for me, going into a league that feels solved in terms of builds, that's just so much less exciting. It also feels like balance is one of the easier things that they can ship in an update that has real weight in terms of the impact it has for players. After all, it's mostly just numerical changes, nerfing the best builds and bringing up some of the most underused skills. So it has been disappointing whenever a league has released with limited or no balance changes. And this information from Jonathan here doesn't sound very promising in this regard. If there's only 2 people that can make balance changes for either game, and they're working on PoE 2 most of the time, that may mean that PoE 1 doesn't get many balance changes going forward. Let's hope I'm wrong about that, but it's a concern that I wanted to voice anyway. Overall though, I have to say that I'm optimistic about the future of both Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. We have what looks like an Atlas expansion just 2 weeks away for PoE 1, and PoE 2 is getting steady improvements patch by patch, and it looks like we can look forward to consistent releases again. Let's hope they're able to stick to it. That's it for this one guys, thank you very much for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.